Okay, this is an interview for the oral history program at the Institute for Latino Studies at the University of Notre Dame, and today's date is September 16th, 2010, and we're in South Bend, Indiana, and the interviewer is me, Jen Pankithman, and I will be interviewing Salvador Plascencia. So thanks so much, Salvador, for being here. Would you please state your full name, date, and place of birth?
Salvador Plascencia, December 21st, 1976. Date of birth. What
Place of birth.
Place of birth, Guadalajara, Mexico.
Okay, thanks. So I want to start out with the tension between oral and textual storytelling. People of Paper starts out with what feels like a really strong oral tale or myth, and then it quickly becomes fragmented and fractured into split narratives and points of view, and eventually kind of turns inside out and incorporates the metafictional character Saturn, who's a stand-in for the author. Did you feel the tension between those elements when you were writing, and how did that affect your writing?
I mean, the sort of idea of the oral, to me, is always this interesting thing because I have these gregarious family members who are part of the oral tradition in a sort of typical way, tell me their stories of my grandfather, my grandmother, immigration stories. But I can't do that. Like, my voice falls apart, I stutter, I mumble. Half the things I'm going to say are not going to show up audioly, sonically, because I talk too fast. So to me, writing is taking the oral and sort of pausing it, slow it down, then I can control it and manipulate it. But also, I love books, and I love holding a book. So it's sort of, to say the orality of it is important to me is true, but I also think it's false. I think the book is not an oral thing. It is a very material, physical sight thing. It's not just this box holding sound. So I love the interaction of the actual physical book. So I feel the tension mostly because I'm angry that people think the book is just this box of sound. And, so I think the book should be material. Mm-hmm. So the tension's there, but part of me is like, the book is actually a physical thing. It is not an oral thing. Right. But when you read someone like Salinger, it feels oral. When you read someone like, when you read When the Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, when you read most books, first-person narrative feels like it's oral.
Right. And so did you start out, like, I'm just curious, like, did you start it with like an image or a character, or did you start with the oral voice in your head and then did it, because in the book it progresses from that and then it just kind of, the progress becomes more and more written and it goes, because the beginning is just like an oral, like, straight narrative and then it kind of goes crazy. Did you start with that, or did you know it was going to go crazy on you? Or
I mean, it's not that I knew it was going to go crazy on me. I just didn't know how to do it. I didn't know what I was doing. But it started with an image, and I think I was 19 years old, and there was this image of this woman made out of paper, and that always just sort of was there, but didn't really become anything. And then when I started writing the story, when I began seriously, the woman made out of paper was supposed to be what the book was about, and then it didn't pan out that way. She just became a minor character.
Oh, okay.
Or sort of, metaphorically important character, but not narratively a main character.
Oh, cool. So you actually started with the title, like, sort of image there.
I started with this woman made out of paper because I wanted to have the ultimate metafiction in my 19-year-old head, where you would read this story and this woman would fall apart on your hands and you would be holding her and it's paper. So that was a conceit when I was 19 and excitable.
As far as the political aspects of your book, it seems like war is mostly a personal affair in People of Paper, and the players are kind of characters in a novel versus the novelist, and the stakes are privacy and freedom from the kind of exposure that fiction writing brings about. And the EMF, for El Monte Flores, is kind of a variation on city gangs, and it's you call it the First Street Gang, born of carnations, and they wield flower cutters instead of guns. Did you have like political ideas in mind when you put those guys in, or do you see this novel as upholding political ideals or subverting them?
I mean, what's political? I mean, I guess I always have a problem just to understand what a political position is. Like my my first sort of duty I always feel is like to the story, even if it means that I have to in a way undermine my politics, because I don't want to be, I don't want to ride a political track because I get bored by that. And so my first sort of priority is to write a narrative that's compelling, that's true to the characters, whatever that means. And your politics are just sort of subconscious, to me at least. And if it becomes political, it's never a conscious agenda. Hopefully it's born out of the character's position and not me trying to sort of make a political statement. But also, I'm an immigrant who spent most of his life in East Los Angeles. I live in a Latino community. Whatever politics, in a way, I already been there. I can't really separate that from my aesthetic. Mm-hmm. But I do not want to write a book that's explicitly political, and I don't want to perform a duty simply by the fact that I am a Latino. I don't want to testify. I don't want to make a position for immigration or assimilation. I want to be true to the characters, and then whatever results of that is fine. But I don't want the politic to guide my aesthetic.
Okay, sure. The thing that I was struck by when I read this was the extreme tactility of the novel and the way that symbols seem to be the most important component of the writing, and there's so many. There's roses and bees and limes, and obviously the title refers to the way that people are physically constructed out of something tactile. And the characters always seem to be expressing themselves through attachment to objects. And I really like the symbol of the limes in particular because they have this connotation for me of being really vibrant and yet caustic, which I think is how I would describe your novel. What was on your mind when you chose these objects that fill up the book?
I mean, a lot of the objects are just, I grew up eating limes, and I was told to not eat limes. You're going to eat up your enamel on your teeth. So then an extension of that logic is, what happens if you do eat too many limes? Is it going to cause citric poisoning? And so these objects, which are, this fruit that becomes dangerous. So I was really excited by taking this object that's everyday, common, and then making it dangerous, and you have to hide it to consume it, and it becomes contraband. So a lot of the objects, I always think, I'm going to give you the same answer for the whole interview. It's always about the character. So if the character has an attachment to this, then, and also sometimes it's just a dumb image. It's Saturn because I think Saturn is aesthetically the most beautiful planet I can think of. Like, it's a better looking planet than Venus, than Mars. It has a ring. It's it's just a beautiful planet image wise, but then it has all these connotations about what Saturn is. And a lot of those things are initially just coincidence because I gravitate towards the image. So the bee is an image I like, but then it has this function, it has this mythology that then you find later. So I'm attracted to the image, kind of connected to the characters, and then that's how those images then, in a way, you think of bees becomes Cameroon. You think of lemons become Little Merced, roses become EMF. So I like those moments because then these characters have these very easy, identifiable sort of tags.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say, is that the characters seem to be operating in this way that's very fluidly interacting with the symbols that are attached to them. So yeah. I just want to talk a little bit about influence, and I think there's a lot of Marquez in this book, and there's this part where the town Darro Madero is like disintegrating into dust, and the atmospherics there, and this is just like one example. Like, I could have pulled many examples, but it reminds me of parts in Cien Años de Soledad where the town and the characters are all involved in a system of symbols that are clearly or maybe vaguely metaphors for emotional kind of states. Do you think that's a correct characterization, or how do you feel about like showing your Marquez influence, sort of?
I always feel like it is Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude, Cien Años de Soledad was his novel that I was obsessed with. Like, I read it for 3 years all the time on a loop. Marquez was highly influential. So I always felt like if I can do 1/10 of what he does, that's magic enough for me. But somehow in that, then I discovered James Baldwin. I read more Vonnegut. I read John Barth. I read all these experimentalisms, And then I loved Marquez. I was amazed by it. But then I sort of tried to make all these other influences sort of penetrate through Marquez and then sort of filter out. So Marquez is definitely the base, and then all these other influences are peek through that. So I mean, I feel Marquez is he marks almost every sentence, every page, every mood. He's an influence. I guess I don't know what the question is anymore.
I think you answered it.
Okay.
So you're comfortable with like
Marquez being my hero?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. That's,
I mean, but what's strange is like I love 100 Years of Solitude.
Yeah.
But he's not even my favorite writer. My favorite writer is James Baldwin, who writes very traditional, realistic relationship novels. So it's strange that my favorite writer is not my biggest influence.
Yeah, I think that makes sense though. So are there other influences that I would not guess from reading this book?
I mean,
I'm just curious.
I would argue that Baldwin is in there, but he's not as recognizable because you don't see the bees and the magical symbols that immediately link me up to Marquez. And also my last name being Plascencia, somehow they look for like identifiers that are also like Borgian or like Marquez and Fuentes. Because my name is Plascencia, somehow that becomes an easy association. And that happens. I mean, like, I love Bolaño. I write nothing like Bolaño, but there'll be reviews like, Bolaño. I mean, I love it because you put me next to Bolaño, but there's aesthetically, syntactically, no line that makes me like Bolaño. But, I mean, anytime you put me close to him, I'm happy. Other influence, I mean, Vonnegut, I think, is in there. Steinbeck, which is strangely. I think all your influences in the way show up. Maybe some are more pronounced than others because you can't really shake them.
Well, with like the visual stuff, like the columns, was that influenced by anyone, or did?
I mean, that's straight Lawrence Stern in many ways.
Yeah.
Early books. Someone that I love visually, but actually can't stand to read is Kathy Acker. Like, I love looking at her books. And I read it, and I have no love for the sentence.
She's very caustic. Speaking of caustic. Okay, a lot of writers, this kind of relates to the last question, a lot of writers consider themselves primarily readers. Do you consider your reading or your writing more important?
More important? I mean, I pay the bills on my writing, but I mean, I read a lot more than I write.
Right.
But I mean, I do a lot of things. I mean, I play more soccer than I write. So, I mean, I don't really think, to me, calling myself a writer has always been a weird thing because I've always lied about it. Like, oh, I'm studying English, I'm studying to be a teacher. I never came out till recently that I call myself a writer. So even to self-identify as a writer is sort of strange. So like I wrote a book. Does that make me a writer? I think about writing all the time. Does that make me a writer? But I'd rather be playing soccer and play more soccer. But because I can't earn a living by playing soccer, I can't say I'm a soccer player.
Yeah.
That was the most confusing answer.
No, it wasn't. Okay. At one point in the novel, after the plot is turned toward metafiction and it's clear that Saturn is supposed to be Salvador Plascencia, the character Liz levels one of many accusations at Saturn, and she accuses him here of exploiting real-life material to make a book. And I quote, "In a neat pile of paper, you have offered up not only your hometown, EMF, and Federico de la Fey, but also me, your grandparents, and generations beyond them, your patria, your friends, even Cami. You've sold everything save yourself." So were you feeling guilty, or do you agree with what Liz is saying here?
I'm always feeling guilty because I feel like, I mean, it is this part of the theme of this book is this commodification of story, of sadness, of family, of gossip. And this is sort of this thing I always struggle with, that I'm hanging out with somebody, you tell me this great phrase, and then I'm like, I'm going to keep that. And then I'm going to possess it, then I'm going to write it, and then I'm going to make money. I mean, not a lot of money, but some money off it, and a career off it. So there's always this guilt that somehow you're always appropriating, taking other stories, and because of fact, to them it might be, they're not writers, they're not musicians, so it's not going to become a phrase in their catalog of art, but yet I get to take it and make something out of it. So there's always this guilt about possessing and exploiting and exposing things about people that are close to you, or friends, or even people you don't like, but somehow you get to take that moment and make fun of them that line, even though it might be only important to you that you're making fun of that person or you're taking revenge on this line. I feel really, this is my petty self. So there's obviously this guilt and this tension, like, why do I get to do this?
Yeah. But it seems like, and you mentioned several times, like, making money off of writing is kind of skewing your idea of being a writer, and it seems like if we didn't have this idea of, you know, making money off of writing, would it really be bad to be using, because it seems like stories are such a collaborative thing anyway, so it's kind of like this money aspect getting into the way of the natural creative process, which is just, you know, incorporating everything that you know and producing something out of that. But because it turns into this thing where you're trying to sell books or you're trying to, you know, sell more than this guy or whatever, it's like...
But it's not strictly finances of it. It's like the fact that it gets authored. Like, it has my name on it. It's printed under my bound book. It becomes mine. Even if I was giving it away. Even if it was a non-profit publication where whatever it was. Like, there's still this appropriation and possession of stuff that is not mine and becomes mine. Like, a lot of my uncle's immigration stories are now in my book. A lot of my grandparents' stories are now in my book. And they become mine even though it's theirs. So, of course, there's always this guilt and this tension. Like, I didn't create it. I took it, I sort of dovetailed all these stories together. You know, I found these ways to sort of snap them together and work them together. And now they're mine. But they're not mine. I think there's always a sort of tension, like, why? It's always this guilt, too, like, we were at a party, or we were at this family get-together, and you told me that story, and it's been in my head all the time, and 3 years from now, it's going to be my other book.
Yeah, so I guess we're both focusing on this idea of authorship and the idea that it's some kind of definitive thing where you own it or something, which is just kind of a weird idea, I guess.
Right. But what you do, though, sort of the flip side, is you do aestheticize it. Like, you might say this whole paragraph, and out of the whole paragraph, I think there's one sentence that really captures whatever that is. And then there's still one word that's off. So then I have to sort of take that and contort it and shape it to then fit this other arc. So it's not like you take raw footage and just paste it together. There is sort of this thing that has to be worked and refined. But ultimately, the core is always taken from other sources. Yeah. And then it becomes sort of streamlined.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, yeah, it's very complicated. It seems like, I'm just going off of the sort of verisimilitude of your novel. It seems like in even supposedly non-metafictional novels, there's an aspect of metafiction in that small space before the text, the dedication, and in your novel, the dedication is for your family and then one for Liz, but halfway through when the book restarts, her dedication disappears. And then later you actually refer to the fact that her name is no longer in the dedication page. And it kind of reminded me of Mark Danielewski's House of Leaves, which just takes advantage of every single convention of the printed novel to turn it into story, which I guess I don't really have a question about that. I just, you know, I thought that was really cool, and kind of made a statement about how books are kind of metafictional no matter what you do.
Right, but we don't talk about it. I mean, somehow metafiction is a strange word because it has all these negative connotations. But to me, it's this really warm thing because the first time I ever experienced was through television. Because television is a really closed-off thing because you don't have access. But then, what's a character from Saved by the Bell? Zach, I forget his last name.
Zach is good enough.
Zach Morrison, I forget what his name is. He pauses time and looks into the camera, and to me, like, that seemed like this really intimate thing. But in fiction, metafiction is seen as this distancing thing, exposing the artifice. So I think metafiction, in a way, is a way to be more intimate and actually be honest about what this sort of artifice is, and say, okay, there's all this stuff, but so it's strange that with Robert Coover, with Barth, with a lot of the sort of postmodern, even the postmodern is a weird word. This postmodern writers, metafiction is seen as sort of this distancing technique, and the metafiction is also thought of as a genre, and I see it more as a tool, as a device, and not any different than metaphor. So it's strange that it's become this camp, the metafiction genre or the metafictionist. I feel like you don't say the metaphoricist or the people that use similes, right? You just it's not a simile novel because it has a lot of similes, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Daniel West, I can't even say that.
Whatever.
But that book is strange because then that and Tristram Shandy sort of made me rethink and sort of look at the novel as a material thing and how you can exploit it as a technology. And those are really exciting books for that way because it makes you really see the novel and almost like be excited about its material beyond it as a narrative, or not beyond, but with its narrative. Like, how can these two things interplay? And it seems like a silly thing to not play with the materiality because you're just assuming like that it has no body. In the book, the novel, that's one of its main virtues. It has a body.
Yeah, actually, that was my next question. Was at your reading, you gave what I thought was a very passionate case for materiality of books, and you compared the shape of an open book to Freytag's triangle, which is the plot structure with the rising action and the climax and falling action. So, in other words, there's a possibility that not just the writing itself, but the actual book object can be a system of symbols just as potent as the ones that we normally pick up through just reading the prose. The thing about this was that it seemed completely tied to the printing press because you can't have that physical aspect with just an e-reader or something.
Right. Because an e-reader, in a way, takes away the body of the book. It becomes just embodied. It just becomes like in Ghostbusters, that ghost trap. It just catches the spirit, but the actual ghost disappears. And the e-reader is... It's not even... I can even make a technological argument against it. Because the e-reader is actually a worse technology than the current print technology we have because it has one little leaf or page. There's anatomical parts of the book that you hold disappear. You don't get to have the sort of territory that you covered. I think a lot of the material interaction with the story penetrates into sort of your idea of narrative. And it also... I'm really not being as articulate as I usually am about the book. The e-reader stops being this autonomous, self-contained universe, and it becomes dependent on the infrastructure of technology, electricity, and it gets infiltrated by other things, and it loses its autonomy. And also, every e-reader, every book has to fit in this sort of preset screen, and the book in a way is individual in that way. Like the dimensions can change. And sort of compositionally, I think writers do things that sort of, even subconsciously, will not reveal certain things on certain pages, or they want you to peripherally see other things on the other page. And the e-reader totally makes the book function only as data, and not as a material, physical, embodied novel.
Yeah, which is something it seems like you're really passionate about. And so do you have like a Kindle or anything?
I mean, I don't have a Kindle, but I have a PlayStation. I have a smartphone. I have all the technology. So I'm making an argument for the book as a better technology than the Kindle. That's saying that is a more advanced reading technology, and it's not. It's a shittier. It's a stupid reading technology. It manipulates the book and makes it all just look data. It takes away its body, and all it is sort of these floating bits of pixels, and the book disappears. Yeah,
and everything in an e-reader basically looks the same. It's just like different programs on a computer operating system. Like books don't have individuality.
Yeah,
really.
You're literally taking away its body, and it's just information.
Yeah. Well, I love that there's that note on your website that says People of Paper is not available on Kindle or any other e-reader. And on one hand, it seems like People of Paper is like a novel that people would think is perfectly adapted to be digitized, because there's a lot of interactivity. Has anybody ever approached you about doing like a digital version of People of Paper?
People always email me and they want it for their Kindle. Like actually would break your Kindle. I mean, the Kindle thing is the Kindle can't hold it. Like its layout, its size dimensions, the typography can't hold it. It can't hold the hardcover. The hardcover has die cuts in it. You're not going to punch a hole through your Kindle. I think the Kindle is really limited. Even if you make a bigger screen, it's still limited. because the book does function on this flipping action of materially flipping it, and the Kindle, the page disappears. Once you flip it, it's over, and so all that dynamic is gone.
Yeah. So you're not interested in ever like doing a digital version of
a
the
novel?
book? Yeah,
book?
or of any book that you're working on, like.
No, I mean, unless the technology gets better, but you're not going to improve in this technology.
Yeah.
I can't see the future, but there's a reason the book has held up the way it looks, because it's this perfect technology.
Yeah. Cool. So I have this paperback published by Harcourt, but I've seen the McSweeney, the really nice McSweeney's one, and which has blotches of ink, and then even entire pages that are just blocks of ink, and it has holes punched in it, strategically, of course. And was there any difficulty with either publisher in getting those things added?
With McSweeney's or with Harcourt?
Either one.
Production-wise?
Yeah, yeah.
McSweeney's does anything you want. And
That's good.
So they really they let your book be what you want it to be. So that's really exciting. But when the book was going around as a manuscript, they all said financially not viable, we can't do it. And then with Harcourt, I mean, once it did well with McSweeney's, Harcourt took it on. But they had to change some things. There's no die cut, because I think it costs 5 cents to make a die cut. You multiply it times 4, it's 20 cents. It adds 20 cents to the production of the book, and that's seen as maybe more than it should cost.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of foreign editions have done a die cut, and half of them haven't. But now people let me do whatever I want. Like, if you have a story and it does whatever you want, that's fine. But initially, that wasn't the case. They're like, what is this crazy thing? Right.
You had to prove it was. So you had your manuscript, and it already had all the visual stuff on it. Like you were physically drawing on your manuscript, or?
First, I do it by hand.
Okay.
And then I used, back then, the design software was PageMaker, and then it became Quark. Now it's InDesign. So.
Okay.
So I'm 3 generations behind on layout software.
Huh. That's just an interesting tie back to the e-reader question. I mean, maybe you could like make this text on one of those programs and then just publish it on one of those programs. I don't know, instead of an e-reader.
Yeah, the thing is, everybody's like, "Oh, technology made this possible."
Right.
But part of it is not true, because it's true. But Lawrence Stern would go to his printer and move the type and do all the funky things. And basically all that the publishing software allows me to do, or layout software, is pretend that's my printer. But if I had access to my printer, the fact that the sort of distance between the printing and the writer, that's what sort of, in a way, makes the text not as dynamic and diverse, because there's such a distance. But when technology between the software, between the printer and the writer are so close now, you could see the process and production of it a lot closer. It's not technology made it easier. It's sort of my proximity to where it gets published that allowed me to sort of manipulate it.
So the software is mimicking the printing press,
right. Or what the printer can do, the possibilities of it. And before, if you're just composing on a typewriter, or you're composing on Word, you don't think those possibilities, because the technology is actually limiting you. And all the InDesign does is just opens it up and says you can put text and blocks wherever you want.
Yeah.
So in a way, just undoing technology by saying it's open, do whatever you want.
Huh. I like this idea.
Because I do it all initially manuscript. It's all on the hand.
Yeah.
But on Word, I couldn't lay it out because the technology was stupid.
Right.
So I had to use this sort of trade technology.
Yeah. Which is just perpetuating the printing press kind of approach. I'm going to switch topics a little bit. So I think that in the novel, Saturn lives in Syracuse. He's in upstate New York. I don't think they say.
I think he moves around. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, he goes back to El Monte, or kind of appears there magically, and then the character finds him through the ceiling or something. But anyway, so you did your MFA at Syracuse, and I just finished the MFA program here, so I have to ask you, what did you think of your MFA experience?
It was the best time of my writing life. what I did was talk about sentences, and hang out with, great peers and professors. I mean, and I had no idea what sort of the steps to being a writer are, whatever that means. Whatever MFA, it's a, there's critiques like professionalizes writing.
Right.
It's a sort of this puppy mill of writers, whatever. But I was clueless. I was 19, 21 years old. I applied when I was, I think, 20 years old. I had no idea what it meant. So to have this space where they gave me, a little bit of money to live on, and just give me 3 years to talk about writing and write, I mean, it was phenomenal. I mean, it was a hard town to go to after living in California my life and never seen snow.
Yeah.
But I'm really nostalgic about that time, because never in my life will I probably ever again be able to be committed to just my novel. Like, even if I get a nice teaching post, there's still other things to worry about. MFA was strictly about sort of writing and reading each other and reading. I mean, I loved it.
Did you teach when you were in the MFA program?
We taught a little, but it was like minimal. And I mean, I had 2 years where I didn't teach and 1 year where I taught.
Oh, wow.
And I was, 22 and teaching. It was sort of this disaster.
Yeah, I've been there. So I want to ask about, like, when you're writing, do you have a reader in mind, or what do you see the reader kind of going through as they read the text?
I mean, first I want to be excited about the sentence I'm writing. So it's very, it's writer-centric to myself. Like, why is this sentence exciting to me? So that's the first pass. And then second pass, I just put on the reader hat. I'm like, is this boring? Is this make no sense? Is this expected? How do I turn that? So, I mean, it's two hats, I think. So first I have to be excited. I can't be bored writing. Ultimately it's going to be some sort of segueing you're going to have to perform to sort of make things make sense. So that would happen. But mostly, I think I want to be excited, and then as a reader, I want you to be surprised and not bored.
So you don't have a particular group that you're writing for? It's just anybody that likes good writing.
But like imaginary group, or like I'm thinking of like James Wood. I mean, what do you?
Are you writing for other writers, or do you write for, I don't know. Is that like too? Am I sounding like a publisher here? Like, if you're writing for a certain demographic or something?
I mean, I don't really think. I mean, there's some times where like the publishing culture, you think like, I need to write the New Yorker story, but then you find out that you're completely inept at that, or that you can't write the realism first-person story. And I try it as a challenge to myself, but I can't do it. Like, that story breaks down. I get bored. The story doesn't work. Like, The People of Paper, I always thought was crazy because I consciously said, I'm going to write a crazy novel. But it's just because I'm too dumb to write a traditionally linear novel that looks like a novel. So I feel sort of reassured that I wasn't just putting on like my crazy experimental hat. It's just it's the only way I can write without it breaking apart.
Mm-hmm. Something that just came into my head that I just want to ask real quick is, were you inspired by any like visual art, or even like musicians when you made this? Or
I mean, there was this movie, I just forget his last name, but the title of the movie is ¿Quién diablos es Julieta? Or Who the Hell is Juliet? And just sort of this documentary, but when you're watching it, suddenly you realize half of it's not true, and it's visually stunning, but it's also this nonsense documentary. And part of it, the excitement and the frustration of it is like, you just told me this thing about this imaginary tribe of people, and if you step on their foot, do not step on their feet, because if you step on their feet, they'll kill you, But he does it so offhanded and natural that you start thinking maybe it's a real tribe. So that movie was really, really exciting to me because it did fiction. It was documentary, then transitioned to fiction, and then back, and you can never tell what was true and what wasn't. So that movie was really documentary. Was really excited me.
There's a Julieta in this one too.
Is there in that book?
Yeah, it's been a while.
You forget people.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't even know if it's Julieta or Juliet. I don't remember. But it might keep the anglicized Juliet. Anyways, and the visual, I don't know. Strangely, like a lot of Spanish language children's, like Burbujas, Chespirito. But visually, I always had those in mind.
Can you talk a little bit about what you're working on right now?
I'm working on the second book. What can I say about it? It's the conceit, if that means anything, because the conceit of that one was this gang fighting a planet, so then people would roll their eyes. Is about shapeshifters and a time derailment, and this sort of the 8th discovered ocean of the world. So this ocean is constantly expanding and shrinking, so it only becomes an ocean after it accumulates a certain amount of volume. So depending on when you're on it, it's an ocean or a pond or a lake or a puddle. And sort of the characters around this ocean, island, puddle, and then there's this woman who shapeshifts and ultimately shrinks into a pod. That's
awesome.
That's more confusing than the gang fighting planets.
Yeah, you can. I think you can. You've topped yourself if that's what you're going for. That sounds really cool. Those are all the questions I had. So thanks so much. I really enjoyed your reading, by the way, and I enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you for having me.